When we first started researching this master plan, we thought it would be just like every other one we've analyzed. We couldn't have been more wrong. This plan is so much more than just a vision. It's at the heart of the debate on ski culture, future development, and everything else in snow sports headlines. Buckle up for a breakdown of what might just be one of the most pivotal fights for the future of snow sports, the Grand Targhee 2018 Master Development Plan. Now, odds are that very few of you have heard of the Grand Targhee Master Plan, its contents, or the surrounding debate. I'll bet many of you have never even heard of Grand Targhee itself. However, in researching this plan, we discovered arguments which hold immense implications for the entire future of the North American ski industry. This video will not be your normal master plan video, because beyond just exploring what Targhee wants to build, we're also going to be telling the story of a dispute 7 years in the making and diving into what it means for the industry as a whole. Stick with us throughout, or jump around using the chapters below, but you're going to want to see what this is all about. So with all of that chit chat out of the way, let's start off just like normal, with a little bit of background about just what a master plan is and 2 critical concepts for understanding the rest of the video. A master development plan, called MDP for short, is a huge, often several hundred-page document submitted to the national forest or other governing body where the ski area operates. Contained within these documents are analysis of the current resort operations, the most pressing needs of the mountain, and future plans to address such needs. It is important to note that approval of a master plan does not constitute approval for any of the projects contained within. It is simply the Forest Service saying they support the vision, while each project still needs individual approval before execution. There are 2 important concepts we ought to discuss, the first of which is comfortable carrying capacity, or CCC. It's a number that describes how many guests the mountain can handle without getting too crowded, quite simply. CCC is case-specific by resort and looks at whichever factors are the limiters, which for Grand Targhee is simply the lifts. Keep CCC in mind. The other concept, which is arguably the single most important concept of the entire video, is something called a Special Use Permit, or SUP. A Special Use Permit is issued to a ski area by the Forest Service, serving as permission for the ski area to conduct commercial operations upon a specific piece of land. These SUPs have a finite term, often 40 years, and only apply to a specific tract of land. You'll see where that comes into play in a little bit, but for now, let's take a deep dive into what exactly Grand Targhee wants to build. Some of these plans have been updated over time, but it's important that we begin by examining the full scope of the original vision published in the 2018 MDP. The first projects we'll discuss are easy because they would happen within the existing special use permit footprint. The Coulter lift, built in 2022, opened up peaked mountain terrain with a 6-pack instead of the originally proposed quad. This change was made for better wind resistance, and the lift has been a hit. It gives Targhee another pod of long groomers while also unlocking some surprisingly steep technical terrain that used to require a snowcat. For a mountain known for its wind, rime ice, and fog, the new lift has improved reliability, and the inclusion of a parking barn for chairs means faster storm recoveries. Next is the Crazy Horse high-speed quad. This would make laps in the ladies' waist area far easier and cut down on the long traverses back to the base. It also provides redundancy if Dreamcatcher goes down, which is important for spreading skiers out. While not flashy, it's the kind of infrastructure upgrade that makes the mountain flow better day to day. Another proposal was the Ricks Basin Triple, a very short access lift in the Blackfoot area that's since been dropped from the most recent plans. Also near Blackfoot was proposed the North Boundary Triple, which would open up some new intermediate and advanced terrain tucked into the edge of the current permit boundary. This would be primarily to offer service when other higher-up lifts are down for winter weather. There was also a platter lift proposed for race training on Palmer's Raceway, mainly for the team's benefit, not the general public. Right next door, the Shoshone Beginner Quad would be replaced with a high-speed version that extends lower down, with new carpets added nearby. The upgrade would make loading easier for beginners, reduce ride times, and allow smoother access from future base area lodging. Improving the beginner experience has been a theme across the industry, and this proposal follows that trend. Finally, the plan included some new trails and regrading work to improve flow in multiple pods, most notably in the Blackfoot, Sacagawea, and Dreamcatcher zones. These would help balance skier traffic and make some of the existing traverses less of a choke point. All in all, these smaller projects could improve the guest experience within the existing footprint. But now, let's get to the crazy stuff, the expansions outside the SUP that really kicked off the fight. The first thing we're going to talk about is an expansion into an area known as Mono Trees. Located downhill and to the looker's right of Sacagawea, this expansion would require an addition of nearly 600 acres to a revised SUP and would be anchored by another new high-speed quad. It would have 5 cut repeat laps along with lots of fantastic tree and meadow off-piste options. Interestingly, the access trails to the pod, M11 and M12, both originate from within the Sacagawea pod, which means that to access Mono Trees, one would first have to ride Sacagawea. This addition to Sacagawea's already access-heavy role could potentially see it become a bit of a choke point. Nonetheless, this new pod would offer another alternative to when upper mountain lifts are shut for weather or storm recovery. In such scenarios, under the full plan, one would presumably be able to ski North Boundary, Shoshone, Sacagawea, and Mono Trees on those bad days. Next is another expansion, this one into an area called South Bowl. This would be another 600-acre expansion containing 3 fixed-grip quads. The West Quad, which would terminate right next to Coulter, would serve classic open bowl terrain on its upper half before filtering into light tree skiing on the lower half. The East Quad wouldn't end quite as high as West, as it avoids a pretty nasty cliff band above and to the looker's left. It would serve a mix of all types of terrain, including everything from tundra to dense forest. Both quads would probably have ride times in the range of 7 to 8 minutes, which is generally acceptable for advanced terrain pods like this. The third quad would be a connector lift from east to west, enabling a return to Peaked Mountain. This pod would be a wonderful expansion to Targhee's already renowned alpine off-piste. However, it's pretty far away from the base area and would serve a fairly limited population. The most contentious part of this plan, however, is its proximity to the popular backcountry zone of Teton Canyon. Targhee's argument in favor of annexing the terrain is that it would then be able to do avalanche control, which would actually decrease the risk for those who ski backcountry in that zone and the patrollers that often have to conduct rescues there. Nonetheless, there are a lot of elements to that particular area that have contributed to sparking this whole debate. As was with the peaked mountain terrain before the Coulter lift installation, the plan proposed cat skiing in the interim in the area before lifts could be constructed. As mentioned earlier, Targhee's CCC is calculated primarily off of its lift infrastructure, so it should come as no surprise that with all of these projects we just covered, the CCC is proposed to double. This means more skiers on the mountain, and they'll need more than just lifts to accommodate them. As such, 2 full-service on-mountain facilities are proposed. They would contain cafeterias and restrooms among other things, and would be located at the top of the Dreamcatcher and Sacagawea quads. While the additional capacity for services could be reasonably incorporated in the base area, this would require skiers in other areas of the mountain to return all the way to the base for a break, which could be a detriment to the skiing experience when compared to similarly sized ski resorts elsewhere. A little bit less ambitious part of the plan would see the construction of warming huts next to many lifts, along with a yurt at the top of Shoshone. The mountain would add snow tubing to the lookers' right of Shoshone and expand their Nordic and summer trail networks. And finally, snowmaking would be added to Funnel, Sitting Bull, Powder Reserve Traverse, Dreamweaver, and Snow Dancer, among others, enabling easier and better early season operations. Soon after the release of the main master plan, on February 11, 2019, a second master development plan for Grand Targhee was approved. Oh, you thought we were here just to talk about one master plan? Oh no, this video is way more complicated than that. This second, much shorter MDP was not submitted to the Forest Service, but rather to the Teton County, Wyoming Board of Commissioners. And rather than talking about lifts and trails, this plan is all about the development of the base area. Just like with the resort-wide MDP, approval of this plan is just the county indicating it supports the vision. On March 11, 2025, Grand Targhee took the first preliminary steps towards getting a development plan for the first couple buildings approved. Included in this were some specifics: a 135-room club hotel, 35 to 40 condo units, an expansion to the Rendezvous Lodge, and a renovation of the Trap Bar. This first phase of development would see such amenities as a new bar and restaurants, a pool, covered parking for the condo guests, covered pathways or bridges between buildings, conference rooms, and new administrative offices and skier service spaces. Now, remember that new Shoshone high-speed quad we were discussing a few minutes ago? This is where the two MDPs tie together, as the proposal for Shoshone to extend lower down is partially to offer convenient access from these new buildings without guests having to walk uphill through the village to Dreamcatcher. And of course, as is the theme with literally everything so far, there has been huge pushback towards this plan as well. Back over on the Forest Service side of things, the first step was an initial scoping period that took place in 2020 and 21. This was accompanied by the customary public comment window, during which they were flooded with pushback. The whole process then went dormant to the public for a bit until March 21st, 2025. On that date, the Caribou-Targhee National Forest released a 625-page draft Environmental Impact Statement, or DEIS. This document goes through analysis of everything and anything that could be impacted by the projects proposed in the MDP, and then puts forth 5 potential courses of action that are primarily based on public comments from the 2021 scoping. While there are many impacts the DEIS covers, one of the most notable is that the bottom of the proposed Mono Trees expansion lift would be in a wetland that isn't allowed to be developed under the current forest plan. Thus, for that project to ever happen, the National Forest would have to fully change their forest plan, as construction in that area could have a serious trickle-down effect on the entire watershed in that area. Let's quickly go over the 3 most important of the 5 alternatives, which are pretty simple. The first is to do nothing and let Targhee continue to operate how it is now without endorsing the master plan. The second is to approve what constitutes most of the 2018 vision. One piece that was eliminated from all of the alternatives and will definitely not be getting approved is the part of the South Bowl containing the east and connector lifts. This means that the reduced South Bowl expansion would now encompass 266 acres. Additionally, the proposal for interim cat skiing before lift service was eliminated. The third alternative in the DEIS would be to support any projects proposed for within the current SUP, but without any SUP adjustments, therefore eliminating the Mono Trees and South Bowl expansions. In short, it's do nothing, do everything, or do only what's in the current footprint. Following the release of the DEIS, Grand Targhee updated its website to reflect the most current plans, that is, what would be seen in Alternative 2. A big piece that's completely new is the proposal to upgrade Dreamcatcher to a 6-person chairlift or chondola. This was proposed primarily off the fact that the Coulter 6-pack has fared much better in the weather than the older lifts have, thus justifying the bigger lift. Additionally, gondolas on the line could provide access to the proposed on-mountain restaurant for foot and other non-skier traffic, although cabins would be off the line more often than not due to their propensity to swinging in the wind. Another piece on the website that is easy to miss is the explicit statement that the South Bowl expansion will not extend all the way down into Teton Canyon, which we'll revisit soon. Now, just as with the earlier scoping period, the standard 90-day public comment period was held for the DEIS. It closed on June 20th, and we can only imagine just how many comments the Forest Service got. Take this to understand the backlash. A Forest Service open house held in Driggs on April 17th, a town with fewer than 2,500 residents, saw hundreds of visitors. As we've said time and again in this video, there are a multitude of serious complaints against both of these MDPs. Let's go through some of the most major of them. Let's start with the geography, which is probably the biggest factor in this entire battle. See, Grand Targhee is in a really odd position. It sits well within Teton County, Wyoming, but its one and only access road comes from Teton County, Idaho. This means that the Idaho towns of Victor and Driggs get a noticeable amount of traffic coming from Jackson Hole bound for Grand Targhee. This could potentially place a strain on these communities, as although they get lots of visitors, very few spend much time in either town, instead just transiting enough to get to and from the resort. The communities are fairly adapted to the flow by this point, but a large increase in traffic driven by the build-out of the master plan could lead to these communities being overwhelmed. When it comes to the base area development, it's the Wyomingites who have say at the end of the day, since it's on private land in their state. However, construction of the base area could further strain resources in Victor and Driggs, while all resulting tax revenue from the increase in visitors at the base would go to Wyoming. One of the most pressing issues within this particular form of opposition is simply the amount of traffic that it could potentially draw to Grand Targhee. Nobody really knows exactly what it could become, and many oppose full build-out because of the risk of their quiet communities going big time. Grand Targhee and the surrounding area are known for being especially laid back, quiet, and local in comparison to mega resort towns like Vail, Park City, or even next door Jackson Hole. Most people don't want that to change, and we certainly don't blame them. A growth in visitation could lead to more traffic, strained emergency services, and a decrease in air and water quality. And of course, it would certainly lead to a marked increase in housing costs as developers swoop in to try and be first on what they would consider an up-and-coming area. The next major factor in opposing the MDP, primarily the expansions, is wildlife. The proposed South Pole expansion would have a major impact on the habitats of some threatened or endangered species, including but not limited to the grizzly bear and the Canada lynx. The mono trees expansion would be detrimental to many birds of prey, including the northern goshawk and boreal owl. In addition, the expansions would have a huge impact on the wilderness surrounding the existing Targhee footprint. There would be increased light and noise pollution and visual scarring from construction and the resort itself. Teton Canyon, generally below the South Pole area, is a very popular backcountry location and would be at risk of having its character impacted by the development at the resort. This opposition to the degradation of the natural state of the mountains is also what is behind much of the opposition to the two on-mountain restaurants, although part of that is also to preserve the character of the ski area itself. Interestingly, these two restaurants are included for approval in 4 of the 5 proposed alternatives, so it's clearly not as much of a hot-button issue as the expansions. With these and many other complaints, it's no surprise that some of the public comments came from more than just private citizens. Teton County, Wyoming was one of the first to send a letter of opposition to the Forest Service. The town of Driggs, Idaho followed, and Teton County, Idaho then based their own letter on the one from Driggs. Dozens of organizations also commented in opposition, including the Jackson Hole Conservation Alliance and the Winter Wildlands Alliance. Of course, with the deluge of opinions and necessary further evaluation, there has been no word from either the Forest Service or from the Teton County, Wyoming Board of Commissioners on the status of approvals for the resort-wide MDP and base area development plan respectively. So, with all of that out of the way, we can finally tie this all together by looking at just what all this means for the ski industry as a whole. At the heart of it, there are a handful of sentiments emphasized in the Grand Targhee fight that are being echoed all across the nation at many other mountains and in many other communities. The first argument at the heart of this is the question of expansion. In this case, it's whether or not expansion is something that Targhee needs in order to survive. George and Jordy Gillett, the father-son owner-operator duo of Targhee, have presented the expansion plans as necessary in order to attract the necessary guests to survive in an environment of constant cost increases. However, many opponents to expansion argue that it's simply not necessary. If Targhee needs to develop further, it should focus first on maximizing the space it has within the current SUP, as the mountain as it stands has one of the lowest skier densities of any ski area of its size. Many have argued that expansion feels more like a want than a need. We here at SRG would liken it to asking for dessert before finishing dinner. Those who live in the area are questioning if it's truly necessary to obtain new land, or whether that's just corporate greed. And at the end of the day, that reflects in almost all expansion seen across the industry today. It calls into question the order of prioritization when it comes to Forest Service land, and at what point these mountains can justify public land being privatized for profit. In the case of the South Pole expansion, it's a zone that is relatively popular with backcountry visitors and thus free. If it were to be annexed into Grand Targhee, it would then only be accessible to those willing to pay for a Targhee ticket. Any new expansion into Forest Service land will invoke this very question. How can one justify whether public land can be annexed for profit? Of course, it's not just about the public. The very lands that ski resorts attempt to expand on are almost always home to some sort of wildlife. In Targhee's case, some species considered threatened. The construction and visitation of a ski resort's infrastructure on any tract of land makes it practically inhabitable for these species, and also significantly detracts from the scenery, although some people find the ski resort infrastructure to be charming in its own way. Nonetheless, beyond just putting areas that used to be free to access behind a paywall, the cost to the environment must be factored in. In this way, Grand Targhee also exemplifies the industry-wide debate of economy versus ecology. Grand Targhee sees plenty of snowfall each year, so it's not as big of a deal for them in the near term, but even they have to question the merit of expanding as seasons shift and snowfall seasons shorten. This is, of course, a much bigger debate in other geographic regions, but certainly still exists in this fight over Targhee. At the root of this, there then arises the question of who gets to decide all of this. In the case of the base area, is it fair to Idaho communities that Wyoming gets to give the green light? And similarly, is it fair for a ski area somewhere else who wants to build out its base area to get the go-ahead from its municipality without the upstream and downstream communities getting a say? The Forest Service has public comment periods to gauge ideas on how it should proceed, but to our knowledge, nothing's saying that they have to listen to the public. As such, Why should the Forest Service have pretty much the sole say in decisions that could significantly erode communities miles away? When other ski areas elsewhere look to have their own major developments, who all gets a say and who doesn't? Why? Another major question regards the value of atmosphere. Grand Targhee was originally built with money from a grant in order to be a community asset, with the purpose of keeping people from moving away from the area. Stemming from those very roots, nowadays it is well known for its laid-back local vibes. The proposed expansions, on-mountain restaurants, premium lifts, and base area development all pose significant risk to that current air. It brings up another very difficult industry-wide question. Who gets to ski here? As is typical, the locals don't want you to talk about Grand Targhee. It's uncrowded, and they want to keep it that way. But yet, word gets out that it's uncrowded, and so people start visiting it because of that. By developing the mountain, that may speed up the process of increasing external visitation, but it very well may come at the cost of longer lines, more crowded slopes, and a worse atmosphere. It's the same argument that many have in Colorado, Utah, Whistler, Tahoe, and other major destinations. Locals complain that there are too many tourists, but what right does anyone have to say someone else shouldn't get to ski? It's contradictory, with no clear-cut answer. One example of a preserved atmosphere is Colorado's Arapahoe Basin, which, despite recently being bought out by one of the big ski companies, has prioritized the skier experience over sheer numbers. This has led to skyrocketing popularity, so a basin has dealt with some crowding and implemented policies to address it. As they continue to prioritize the feel of the area over pure profit, they have gained so much in terms of reputation. This brings up another interesting question. Is it possible for a ski area in Targhee's position to increase its visitation without having to do anything radical? Could it prioritize the skiing experience and rely on the resulting high reputation to draw more visitors? But then, at what point does the mountain stop and start to limit visitation? How does a ski resort balance high enough visitation to turn a profit, but low enough visitation not to have a significant hit to its reputation? The on-mountain restaurants themselves are an entire point of contention, as Targhee currently has no on-mountain services. This reflects an extremely old-school style that even the likes of Mad River Glen can't claim. The single act of planning on-mountain facilities puts Targhee significantly closer to becoming a true destination mountain, one that sees more and more tourists each year while properties get gobbled up to become short-term rentals so fast that families that have lived in the area for centuries can no longer afford it. And while that may be a bit extreme, it's far from outside of the realm of possibility. The question then goes back to one of how much management values authenticity versus numbers. Their visitation may shoot up, but it may not be the same Grand Targhee as we know today. Is it worth it? And sure, we're drawing a lot of assumptions out of two buildings here, but it doesn't take much to see just how fragile the balance is and how easily it could be disrupted. The basic essence of the entire issue here is a simple question. What does responsible growth really look like in the ski industry? It's a question that nobody can really answer, but we hope that looking at these issues on a smaller scale has helped you understand the predicaments and paradoxes that the ski industry faces today. More people than ever want to ski, and as evident as that may be, this battle demonstrates very clearly just how difficult it is for a mountain to actually address that challenge. As we continue to watch this unfold, we may very well see the start of a trend for the industry as a whole, which is both exciting and terrifying. Regardless of how it ends, this situation is going to be a long, hard slog with wide-reaching implications no matter which way it ends up going. Whatever decisions are made at Grand Targhee set a precedent for the entire future of the industry, answering many of the questions we posed above. If anything critical happens, rest assured we will make you aware of it on this channel. Well, this video ended up in a much different place than we had originally anticipated, but we like it that way. And here we were, thinking our days of insane research projects were over. If you're still here listening to me ramble, we hope that you can take something away from this video. We would love to hear all of your guys' thoughts down below. If you found this video enjoyable, interesting, or informative, please consider subscribing to help support this dream. Thank you all so much for watching. All my love, I'm out.